economists use this magic word, rent. Rent to an economist means a payment in excess of opportunity cost. In other words, rent is you getting a payment you didn't earn. If you get a payment you didn't earn, it's a rent. Remember we talked about there's something called economic profit. There's normal profit and economic profit. Economic profit is a rent. It's a rent. How do I know it's a rent? Well, I prove something's a rent if I can take it away from you and it doesn't change your behavior. Let me say that again. Something is a rent if I can take it away from you and it doesn't change your behavior. So if you think about a business that's earning an economic profit, by definition, I'm going to stay in business as long as I have my normal profit. So I can take away the business's economic profit and it will still stay in business. That makes that economic profit a rent. If you're saying, why do we use that word? Well, it's simple. The old economists, the Adam Smith generation economists, they didn't get this whole marginal thing. They figured that since land, an actual physical land, couldn't move, it didn't need to get paid. Why do you need to pay something that's going to be there regardless? So they thought that all the landowners were earning rent, right? You had to pay rent on your land. So rent became synonymous with something you didn't deserve. Because in their minds, you don't deserve to be paid when all you do is own this piece of land that's not going anywhere anyhow. Now, we modern economists, and we'll talk about this way more videos after this, but we don't believe that anymore, and we'll talk about why that is. Okay? Monopolies are actively out there trying to get rents, what we call rent-seeking behavior. In perfect competition, if the businesses are earning economic profit, if they're earning a rent, new businesses will come in. There'll be entry of new businesses, and those new businesses will suck up all that rent, right? The new businesses will each take a part of the old business's rent away from them, and pretty soon nobody's getting any rent. Oh, in a monopoly, by definition, nobody's coming in to steal my rent. So if the monopoly can generate rent for themselves, they get to keep it. Okay? So monopolies are going to engage in rent-seeking behavior. Microsoft has had some issues with the government, and one of those issues was how they were pricing things. Okay? They were clearly trying to increase their rent. They were definitely engaged in rent-seeking behaviors. Okay. We remember consumer surplus. I'm just restating this consumer surplus thing. I have the Monopoly dog up here. It's my favorite guy to be in the game is the dog. Consumer surplus is the difference between what you actually paid for something and the highest amount you would have paid, right? The consumer gains consumer surplus. That's why it's called consumer surplus. When I go buy that sandwich, I give the store money and I take the sandwich. I have paid less for that sandwich than I would have, and so I'm better off because I bought that sandwich, and the amount I'm better off is called consumer surplus. So every consumer that engages in a transaction is better off because of the transaction, and how much better off they are is their consumer surplus. Okay? So, you should remember all this because it's so much fun. I didn't draw the supply curve in, but imagine there's a supply curve here, right? Just clean it up by not putting the supply curve in. So here's the price. Here's the demand curve. We have this triangle here, which I cleverly, in the middle of the triangle, put the letter A. That triangle A is the consumer surplus for perfect competition. For supply and demand, that letter A is consumer surplus. Yes? Do we all agree? If I put the supply curve in, now I get another triangle down here, and that triangle is the producer surplus. Yeah, you knew that. Okay? So consumer surplus, producer surplus, supply and demand, all that beautiful surplus. Okay? Now, again, my goal here is to show that monopoly is bad for society. Okay? Monopoly is bad for society. Well, how do I show that? Well, what does the monopoly do? The monopoly decreases quantity. It decreases the quantity, raises the price. What happens to my consumer surplus? Well, now all of a sudden, this triangle C is my consumer surplus. C is a little bitty thing compared to A, right? C small, A big. C small, A big. C is small, A is big. C is small, A is big. Okay? So that's the first thing. My consumer surplus is less. Now, that does not mean that society is worse off. Because if the monopoly gets what you gave up, it's still possible that society is just as well off or better off, because the monopoly is happy, you're sad, but the monopoly is happy. And if the monopoly is happy enough, then it all balances out. But that's not what happens. And we already kind of talked about this. We already saw this to be true in an earlier example. But this box B here, right? I have a rectangle that's labeled B. Everybody see my rectangle B? What's B? Well, that's the increase in the money that the monopoly is collecting. So the monopoly gave up some sales, shrunk the production. It took part of my consumer surplus. So it took part of the consumer surplus and converted it into cash for itself. The monopoly is getting more cash by the size of the rectangle B. The monopoly is taking in more money from its customers by the size of rectangle B. So we've converted some of the old consumer surplus into money, but not all. Now we have this new triangle A, and we've been through this before, and you're saying, why are we doing this again? Because it's important. That triangle A right there is a deadweight loss. The people in triangle A were buying this product before at the lower price, but now that this is a monopoly raised the price. They're not buying the market. They're out of the market. So the people between 0 and Q2, if I'm from here to here, these people, they get less consumer surplus than they used to, but they're still getting the product, so they're still better off. These people in here aren't buying the product anymore. They lost all of that consumer surplus. The monopoly didn't steal it. These people over here, this first group of people, the monopoly took part of their consumer surplus away from them, but they still get to have some of it. This other group of people, they're not buying the product. So the monopoly is not getting anything from them, and they're not getting consumer surplus, and that means the world is worse off. C was consumer surplus before. It still is. B used to be consumer surplus, but now it goes to the monopoly. A used to be consumer surplus, and it's just gone. Nobody gets it. So to steal B from us, the monopoly had to take A and B away from us so they could get their hands on B. That makes society worse off. Society used to have A plus B plus C, and now society has B plus C, and A is gone. Okay? Is that fun? It's fun. All right. Again, deadweight loss is a loss that happens to society because these consumers are priced out of the market. Monopoly lowers the well-being of society to make itself better off. That's the result of rent seeking. Okay? They made changes. They shrunk the quantity that they sold to increase their price so they could generate more revenue. And in doing that, They drove people out of the market, created a deadweight loss, made society worse off. And the same thing's true about producer surplus. So really, there's this thing which is sort of shaped like a triangle. All of this surplus goes away. That's the sum of the producer and consumer surplus that goes away. That whole thing is a loss. Okay? That whole thing is a loss. The whole thing. But I'm more worried about the consumers than the producers. Okay. The examples we just went through are for what we call a single price monopoly. It's a monopoly that charges everybody the same price. It's a monopoly that produces identical products. So oil companies, electrical companies, gas companies, they charge everybody the same price. Every barrel of oil is about the same price in the world. Okay? Charge a single price. If they can, they're not going to do that. When we have a homogeneous or identical product that's easy to resell, then got to do that. The OPEC countries, the oil-producing countries, tried for a while to zap the United States because they were mad at us. And go talk to your history professor about why they were mad at us in the 70s, but they were mad at us. So they tried to make life miserable for the United States. Well, what did we do? We had our European friends buy the oil for us, send it to us. So if OPEC wants to charge us $100 and they want to charge people in Europe $50, we can get the people in Europe to buy the oil for us at $50 and just make the ships turn left, and we can pay 60 or 70 for it instead of the 100, and OPEC doesn't get the difference. Our European friends get the difference. So if it can be resold, if it's a basic product that can be resold, the monopoly has to charge everybody the same price. And they've got to figure out a way to keep you from reselling. If you've ever looked at your Wi-Fi contract and probably you just, clicked accept and didn't really look at what you were agreeing to. But if you have Wi-Fi in your house, one of the things you agreed to is not to sell Wi-Fi to anybody else. What you could do, and again, you can't do this because it's in your contract that you're not going to do it, and they have other ways to try to limit you from doing this. But imagine that you have a little old lady that lives next door, and she uses Wi-Fi once a day to check her email, and she doesn't want to pay for a whole Wi-Fi thing. Well, you could get a Wi-Fi extender, put her on her Wi-Fi, and get her to pay part of your Wi-Fi. Your Wi-Fi costs would go down. She'd be getting cheap Wi-Fi, and the only people who wouldn't be getting any money out of that deal are your ISP that's providing you internet service. So you signed an agreement that says you won't do that. Okay? Monopolies get eaten up if their product can get resold. Right? Exciting. All right. So most monopolies charge multiple prices. They're going to charge different prices to different people or to different groups. We call them discriminating monopolies. Okay, and that doesn't mean, gender or race or something like that. It means whatever groups they can identify. They discriminate. They do something called price discrimination. So if you've ever seen old people at a casino, they all carry these stupid cards around with them. That card makes them part of the players club or the slot club at that hotel, and they get different prices than normal people, than regular people who don't have the card. Okay? That's a form of price discrimination. Price discrimination is either charging prices to different buyers by the buyer, which is by the unit of the good, by each sale I make, or charging different prices to groups. Sometimes UNLV students get student discounts. Chipotle used to give UNLV students, Chipotle across the street from UNLV, if you flashed your Rebel card, you got a free small drink when you bought your burrito. There was a Carl's Jr. across the street that's not there now. They used to give students 10% off. Okay? That's a group of people, right, students, and I can give them a discount. Any business that's not in perfect competition can do this. You don't actually have to be a monopoly to price discriminate, obviously. Chipotle and Carl's Jr. are not monopolies, so you don't have to be a monopoly to do this. But it's easier when you're a monopoly to do than if you're something else. All right, so what do we know about price discrimination? Well, there's really three kinds. Two of them fall into one group, and then there's a third kind. So there's what we call first-degree price discrimination. That's when every customer gets charged a different price. Your car dealer at least tries to practice price discrimination. When you go to buy a car, you have to negotiate with the dealer. You can, get different prices out of them, get different terms out of them, get them to throw in some floor mats. You can make all kinds of deals with your car dealer, and in theory, at least, every single person who buys an identical car can end up paying a different price. This is good and bad, right? If you're good at that negotiation, it's good for you. It turns out there have been a lot of studies done, and those studies show that there's real discrimination because of this, that car dealers charge, on average, women get charged higher prices than men. The car dealers are less willing to negotiate. They don't see the need to negotiate with women as much, and people of color. So women who happen to be black or Hispanic, on average, are going to get worse deals from their car dealer than old white guys. Okay? But first-degree price discrimination, I charge a different price to every customer. I negotiate it. Second-degree price discrimination is quantity discounts. So these are both the buy unit thing. Two ways we do the buy unit thing. Either we do it individually or we do quantities. So you go out to fast food restaurants. Sometimes they have, in fact, you go to Chipotle. Every time you buy one, you get points. When you get enough points, you get a freebie. That's a quantity discount. You fly on airplanes often enough, you get miles, you get to fly for free. Okay? Quantity discounts. And sometimes they're just straight up quantity discounts. If you go to Office Depot and you buy one ream of paper, it's going to have one price. If you buy more than 6 reams of paper, they have a cheaper price. If you buy more than a dozen reams of paper at the same time, they have an even cheaper price. So you get lower price when you buy in quantity. And then the most common kind of price discrimination is what we call third degree. That's different prices in different markets or different market segments. Okay? So senior citizen discounts are third degree price discrimination. If you're over a certain age, you get a discount, right? You go to McDonald's, if you're old, you can get a senior coffee, which is cheaper than the regular coffee. All right? If you're a student, there are things you can get a discount on. As a professor at UNLV, if I go buy stuff at the bookstore, I get 10% off. So I can go buy a polo shirt at the bookstore and I'll get 10% off from buying that polo shirt because I'm a professor. All right? So there's all of these groups. You belong to the club. You're old. You're young. If you've ever, if you live in San Diego and you get a prescription from your doctor and you don't have insurance, you don't go to the pharmacy in San Diego to get it filled. You go across the border into Mexico, you go to Tijuana, and you go to the pharmacies on Revolucion, and your drugs will cost you a third as much in Mexico as they do in the United States. It's the same drug from the same company. The instructions are in Spanish instead of in English, but it only costs a third as much. Different markets. People on the northern boundary of the United States go across into Canada to buy drugs because they're cheaper in Canada than they are in the United States. Different markets, different market segments. Okay, we got that? I hope so. So to do this, I have to be able to identify these customers, right? If you pull out a Rebel card, you're probably a student. If you say you're a student but you don't have a Rebel card, you're probably not a student. All right? And then there has to be no arbitrage. Arbitrage is resell. Okay? If a clothing manufacturer decided they didn't like you and started charging you higher prices, or somebody started charging, you can get somebody else to buy it for you and resell it like we did with the oil. That's arbitrage. Okay? You have to make sure that that can't happen. I've often thought that, a way to make money would be if there was a student discount. When the Chipotle had the student discount, you could have gone in there, gotten a burrito, gotten your free cup, then walked outside and resold it to someone for in between what you paid and what they would pay to buy that burrito with the cup. But Chipotle will get really mad at you if you tried that. Buy 10 burritos, get 10 free cups, and then go stand outside and sell them. Probably get in trouble.